Understanding a budget proposal can be harder than it seems. Joe Biden has proposed a record $6 trillion budget for the upcoming year. Now, it's up to Congress as to how much of that proposal will get enacted. But the tone has already been set, and it has to be said that this budget is very different from the one we saw during Trump's presidency. So, what exactly are the good aspects a budget like this can bring to the U.S. economy? And are there any downsides? We will go through it all, so watch until the end to find out how a budget proposal like this will affect the U.S. economy. The critical aspect of this budget proposal is that it really focuses on the country's infrastructure, education, social security, and climate change. Infrastructure refers to the physical development of structures such as roads and buildings. Higher education spending should assist the students in many ways, including an increase in scholarships. Social security here means the amount of money the government plans to spend to take care of its less financially stable population. It has been argued for decades that the government injects billions of dollars into big corporations, and that money never comes down to the poorer person, so an increase in the Social Security net ensures that money is directly spent on those that need it. Similarly, Biden's voters are much more concerned about climate change than, say, Trump's voters, and this is something that has also been reflected in this new proposal. We could be seeing increased spending in an attempt to reduce carbon emissions and move towards a cleaner and greener world. Okay, so that sounds wholly positive. Why would something like this ever be criticized? The thing is that in the financial year of 2020 to 2021, the US government's spending was around $4.8 trillion. Seeing that number ramped up to a staggering $6 trillion has been producing mixed reactions. If we generalize, we can say that the Democrats seem mostly happy with this proposal, while the Republicans do not seem very pleased. The levels of government spending proposed here have not been at this level since the World War II era, so it is no surprise that the government is drastically increasing its spending. Well, we saw millions of jobs being lost during the pandemic. And while some of them were regained, it's safe to say that the average American has suffered big time during the pandemic. So, from Biden's perspective, something like this is absolutely needed, but the Republicans are arguing that America is about to spend more money than it has. So, is there any truth to this point about the US overspending? Well, there is some truth to it in the sense that the rising debt is not necessarily very good for the economy in the long term. It depends on how well the governments can generate more money in the upcoming decade or so. Joe Biden says that he plans to rebalance the economy, or this debt, by increasing the tax on the richest within the country. Unfortunately, that is still only a plan that is yet to be implemented, and no one can say with certain precision that this or that will happen in the future, or if the US government will successfully be able to deal with the debt problem by taxing the rich, as they say. How bad is the problem itself? It helps if you take a look at the figures yourself. The country will run significant deficits when it borrows money to finance Biden's plans. Under his proposal, the federal budget deficit would hit $1.8 trillion in the year 2022, even as the economy will be recovering from the pandemic recession and growing at what the government predicts would be its fastest pace since the 1980s. The deficit would decrease slightly in the following years before it grows again to about $1.6 trillion by the year 2031. As for the total debt held by the public, it would more than exceed the annual value of economic output. By 2031, the total debt would increase to about 117% of the size of the economy. And by 2024, the debt as a share of the economy would increase to its highest level in US history, reminding us of a World War II period. It is important to understand that this budget is in contrast to trickle-down economics. Joe Biden clearly stated that since it does not work, the government will be spending on the lower and middle class directly to improve their living conditions. If we talk about the US economy alone, the macroeconomy would perhaps benefit from lower government spending. However, the higher spending proposed here most definitely seems to be focused on the common person who is not rich itself. Suppose the Biden administration is able to rebalance this increased spending by successfully increasing the tax on the rich without discouraging the huge businesses to invest in the country. In that case, we could call this a pretty successful proposal. As you can see, it will largely depend on how these issues are handled in the upcoming years. Now, let's talk about where all of this increased government spending will be spent. Climate change seems to have made its way back in the budget. Of course, this is a complete 180-degree shift to how Trump's administration handled climate change. The proposal seeks to add about $14 billion to all the government agencies and programs working to curb the effects of climate change. Biden will also ask Congress for $1.3 billion to be given to the Green Climate Fund, which is an organization of the United Nations. Obama had pledged about $3 billion, but had only given about a third of that during his term. As for Trump, all payments to the Green Climate Fund were stopped, and he also withdrew from the Paris Agreement. Biden's proposal seeks to add more than $800 billion over the next 10 years in tax breaks and new spending in an attempt to accelerate the deployment of clean energy technologies to fight climate change. This includes hydrogen fuels and nuclear power plants. The extra spending will be spent on wind turbines, solar panels, and other renewable energy resources so that the greenhouse emission can be cut by 50% back to the pre-2005 levels within the next decade. The budget for the Health Department includes major increases for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the National Institutes of Health, but few changes were made to the Medicare program. The healthcare ideas in this budget proposal seem quite ambitious, but the numbers are simply not there yet. This means that there is still a lot of ambiguity as to where the money will be spent or how it will improve the increasing cost of health insurance. Whilst we're talking about things that did not come up in the budget, student debt is one of them. Although Biden did talk about cutting $10,000 off student loans across the board, it has no mentions in this proposal. As far as the military goes, the Pentagon will see a 1.6% increase in its budget, which will take it to a record expenditure. However, don't let that misguide you, as this was also the smallest increase over any government department in the budget. So, in one way, not nearly as much attention has been given to military spending, but since the US's military budget is already higher than the next 10 countries combined, little has been said about that. Funding has also been increased to address domestic terrorism and violence against women. The proposal requests a $1.5 billion sum to curb domestic terrorism. And as for women's protection, the Violence Against Women's Act could get up to $1 billion, which is twice as much as last year. Basically, the aim here is to increase funding for programs that fight against gender-based violence and open up new initiatives to tackle these issues. Whilst we're talking about the positive aspects, there seems to be an increase in spending on high-poverty schools. Last year, the amount set aside was $20 billion. In this budget, $36.5 billion has been proposed, which sounds promising, provided that this does go through. It also aims to increase funds to early education programs, upping the maximum Pell Grant by $400, which is the largest one-time increase since 2009. The question at the end of the day remains the same. How will all these initiatives be paid for? However, those who argue this point often fail to mention that the country's military spending also seems to be extraordinarily high. Whether all that money is really needed to protect the national interests, well, that's a separate debate. However, Biden claims that the increased spending can be made up for with a simple method that aims to take money from the rich and distribute it amongst the poor. Biden aims to raise taxes on corporations and high earners, which should begin to lower the budget deficits in the 2030s. It has also been stated that tax increases would fully offset the jobs and families' plans over the course of 15 years, which the budget request backs up. Until that time comes, however, the budget deficit will continue to remain above $1.3 trillion each year. It's also worth mentioning that this proposal also seeks to give $13 billion to the IRS to ramp up its action against tax fraud. All in all, it can be said that the Biden administration is attempting to fulfill its promises to its voter base. The increased spending on social welfare, education, infrastructure, and climate change demonstrate that. However, whether the country can afford to take on bigger debts and actually offset the debt within 15 years, as they claim, only time will tell. If they can pull this off, it could go down in history as one of the most important budgets. Do you think that the US economy can survive the huge deficits that will follow the increased spending that is projected by this budget? Will the government be able to increase its tax collection? Share your thoughts, comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon to receive instant updates from our channel. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.